Is on our big exit poll where we are going to go in a moment from now, state after state. Remember, 4 states and a union territory, so lot to look forward to. Who's ahead, who's trailing. But the focus at the top has to be on West Bengal, because that is where the marathon 8-phase polling is about to end. Remember, parts of Kolkata and parts of Bardhaman voted today. Our correspondent is there on the spot.
Suryagni Roy joins us.
Suryagni Roy, appreciate your joining us, Suryagni. Give us a sense of polling today. There was a lot of concern that because of COVID-19, turnout much lower in this phase in comparison to some of the earlier phases. Has the polling ended?
Well, no, there is a half-an-hour window till for the polling to end. It's still 6:30, but as you have stated correctly, that the way the polling began in the first 2-3 phases, the approach was overwhelming. A lot of people were getting out of their houses. We saw early voters coming out, but towards the end of this long polling season, the last 3 phases have seen a comparatively lower turnout even today, especially at the area where we are right now in North Kolkata. The voter turnout from morning has been somewhat around 60%, which is in comparison to the first few phases, it is really low. COVID can be termed as one of the reasons why people are skeptical to get out of their houses and vote.
Right.
But overall, there's been a 70% plus voting since the election started. Back to you.
Okay, I also want to go across to Paulami Saha. She joins us from Kolkata. She's been deputed across the state through this election. Paulami, at this moment, in which camp do you sense a certain sense of confidence? Who's more anxious? Who's biting his nails off? And who do you think at this moment is confident that when the exit poll numbers are out, theirs is the side that will be cheering tonight?
Well, what we can say, Rahul, is that there has been muted confidence on both sides. Obviously, they might be declaring something on the record and saying that, we are going to cross figures unimaginable and it will surprise you. But the confidence is muted. Yes, they're still claiming win both sides, but it's not something that they're not suggesting landslide sweeps at the moment. Going into these elections and into the first few phases, it was the BJP that appeared more confident over the TMC. In the latter phases, it appears like the TMC at least seems to be suggesting that we've done a good with catching up with the BJP. So it remains to be seen, really, eventually, who's the one who's made it past the finishing line.
Okay, Pradeep Gupta, you've done lots of exit polls. How does this poll compare with what you've done in the past? When you approach this exit poll, what's your level of confidence that the numbers that you put out tonight will be the numbers that will hold on the 2nd of May?
So let me tell you, first of all, out of these 4 plus 1, 5 state, 4 state poll was concluded on April 6 itself. And after that, lot has changed as far as the corona impact across the country is there. Now, coming to the West Bengal, which is traditionally, last 50 years, it is a very difficult state to do and conduct the interview because of 2-3 reasons. One is the sheer fear factor. People are very reluctant to reveal their insights. That's the one. Second, this time, because of corona, people were trying to maintain a distance. This is number 2. Number 3 is the language, and number 4, the most important thing, number 4 is because of kind of polling and campaigning was taking place and the kind of sledging from both the sides, particularly TMC and BJP. I mean, people were very reluctant and under fear. They were not ready to talk to our people and our interviewer, but still we try and come out and...
Now, COVID obviously is another factor, because while the other states ended on the 6th of April, Bengal has continued till today. And you've had a COVID outbreak across the country. Has that changed the narrative? Has that made it much more difficult in a sense to even do a proper poll, because people maybe not only had the fear of the political parties this time, but also the fear of COVID?
Yes, definitely yes, there was the case, but when it comes to impact of this extraordinary COVID impact which is there in last 10 to 15 days, and in last 15 days I would say these three phases has been conducted, which is the 6, 7 and 8.
Right.
This is when, you know, and the kind of area which is purely dominated by Malda, Murshidabad and Dinajpur, where the population density is very high in comparison to other part of the West Bengal.
So
yes,
Rajdeep, let's spend a moment on this, and I'm curious on your thoughts as well. Who do you think COVID impacts? Who does this impact negatively? Who could it potentially benefit?
You know, Rahul, that's a tough question to answer. What is clear is if you look at poll numbers, just in terms of polling, the first 3-4 rounds, Bengal is 85% plus in every round. It slipped to below 80%, I think, for the first time in the 6th round. So clearly, COVID may have had some marginal impact on turnout. Now, who that benefits is unclear. Both sides will say our voter turns out. You know, no political party will say our voter doesn't turn out. I think the fascinating aspect of the Bengal elections is that you have a party which in 2016 won just 3 seats, 2011 won 0 seats. So anything that they get in 2021 and they are looking at actually aspiring for power is a huge gain. On the other side, you have the established Trinamool Congress with a larger network because they have won 2 elections, but also faced with anti-incumbency. So I think it's very difficult to put a COVID impact, Rahul, but what is very clear is that COVID, to some extent, I think, brought the narrative out of the shrill political rhetoric of the first 5 rounds. You know, Didi or Didi, the Prime Minister shouting, Mamta in turn sort of, you know, attacking Modi personally. I think the personalization became a little less in round 6, 7, 8. So the narrative has slightly changed, I think, but not...
I don't agree with what you're saying.
You don't agree that the narrative changed of Bengal in round 6, 7, 8?
I think it impacts voting percentages in terms of the number who go out and vote.
Sure.
But in terms of an election where people have largely already decided, because it's such a polarized election, about who they want to vote for, it doesn't change the net outcome of voting decision on the
Rahul,
ground.
I agree. That's why I said I'm not looking at outcomes. I'm saying narrative. Just think of the headlines that you had till about the 20th of April coming out of Bengal. Mamta slams Modi. Modi Shah slam Mamta. It was all very personalized. Then the Prime Minister stepped back, didn't go to Bengal because he was under criticism. Why are you addressing these large rallies? Amit Shah also had to scale down road shows. Mamta carried on. But even her rhetoric was now Prime Minister is responsible, Amit Shah is responsible for what is happening around COVID. So the narrative changed. Whether it changes outcomes,
because
I'm not so sure.
It impacts the election if it impacts your voting behavior.
We don't know whether...
Okay, so let's put that question to a crack team of political pundits who are joining Rajdeep and me on this exit poll evening. I want to welcome Kanchan Gupta, veteran journalist, editor, tracks the ins and outs of the elections in West Bengal. We have with us on this broadcast Veeraraga. Veeraraga will help us track what's happening in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. Sachidaran Murthy is one of the top journalists, has tracked Kerala politics and has a good sense of national politics as well. We'll be listening in to him. Sandeep Shastri joins us. We have Rahul Verma joining us and also Manisha Priyam. I want to go across first and foremost to Sandeep Shastri and hear his thoughts on the question that we were discussing in the studio about the COVID impact from about the 4th and the 5th phase of the West Bengal election. It's very clear COVID numbers were spiking, COVID started entering the conversation. In such a situation, who do you think benefits, who do you think is impacted electorally?
Rahul, I think that is an extremely tough question. My response to that would be committed voters for the TMC, for the BJP, for the left, for the Congress. The committed voters would still go out and vote. And a secondary factor would be in the environment in which people live, the immediate environment in which people live. What is the COVID pandemic situation there? I think it's a combination of these two factors which will, for me, define and decide who is the one who would like to go out and vote. But I think the intensity of commitment to a party would be a critical factor in propelling them to go out and vote.
Rahul Verma, you are also someone who sort of decodes polling behavior. All that we've seen in the last 12 days is a slight reduction in poller turnout. We don't know the last phase in voting turnout. But beyond that, outcomes, do they sort of get influenced in the middle of a marathon election? In the first 4 or 5 phases, the public narrative largely centered around Hindu-Muslim politics, Mamta's track record, corruption. Suddenly, around the 20th of April, 3 rounds still to go, which is all about 104 seats. The narrative changes to COVID, at least in the media. Does that affect voter behavior, Rahul? Do you believe in the middle of an election, voter narratives can change? I don't think you're on mute, Rahul. I think you're on mute.
I think so. So if you look at voter turnout has basically in 4 states, barring West Bengal, the decline has been around 1 or 2%, which is normal fluctuation, which means voters have turned out in almost equal numbers. Second, can the narrative across phases change? Yes, it does. We saw that happening in Bihar elections in 2020. Even, the results also reflected where the NDA was behind our RJD alliance in phase 1. They make a catch up in phase 2 and basically takes a lead in phase 3. So elections can and do change across phases. Something like that can also happen in West Bengal. We cannot rule that out. Right. It was natural that once the COVID numbers started surging in the second week of April, that the focus will change on some of these aspects. Right. But I believe that given what is stake in West Bengal election, more or less the momentum gathered by one party by phase 5, phase 6 will continue to gain in phase 7 or 8. It is not going to turn the election in that sense.
You know, while Rajdeep, West Bengal is hogging a lot of the limelight in this conversation and even in the coverage, the fact is that you've got other big elections as well. There is Tamil Nadu and there is Kerala. And let's spend a moment on Tamil Nadu because we've got Veera Raghav joining us. Veera Raghav, your sense of the level of confidence in both parties, you know, because unlike West Bengal where it's going down to the wire, in Tamil Nadu, you know, both the parties seem to think it's more about margin and who wins by how much and who loses by how much, not so much about which side the winner is going to be.
That's right. I think it's pretty much on expected lines as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned. One would expect the DMK to win comfortably. How comfortably is really the question. But in terms of the larger future for the AIADMK, Rahul, I think the nitty-gritties and the micro details of the results would really matter, like which section of the party is going to win more. So in a sense, one would say that the DMK appears extremely confident even before your exit polls are concerned. They would be watching though to find out what the margins are like.
And Pradeep, the only time you're polled typically, if ever it goes wrong, and it went wrong in Tamil Nadu last time, and remember, we're far more open about our mistakes. That's because we take our work so seriously. Others just pepper over their mistakes, and even if they make the odd or many mistakes, they'll pretend that they never got anything wrong. But the fact is, that was also because Tamil Nadu that day went to polls and you gave a result the same day. Unlike now, because Rajdeep, in Kerala, Assam, Tamil Nadu and Puducherry, he's had so much time that there is absolutely no reason for the model to go wrong. It's simply not acceptable. Pradeep.
Yes, last time we went wrong in Tamil Nadu for 2-3 reasons. One is the same day polling for all 234 seats, and so as the exit poll day. Secondly, the Tamil Nadu, the most important factor that time and even now was the female. It is very difficult to interview all 50% females in anywhere in the country. That's number 2. Number 3 was we were relatively new and the language is a big barrier at that point of time. I think we have learned the lesson and probably overcome all these three aspects, particularly in Tamil Nadu. So I don't think there is a single % of doubt that our poll can go off the mark or wrong.
Tamil
I'm
Nadu, one of the
pretty
more,
confident
it's very interesting that you mentioned now because Tamil Nadu is a
We saw all the fish you came and ate over there.
No, it's a cephalogist nightmare because traditionally the AIDMK and DMK have about a 35 to 40% confirmed vote. It's who the floating voter goes to. Pradeep mentioned the women factor, and I think that becomes more and more important as elections continue in this country with higher turnouts because women are coming in larger numbers. In Bihar, one of the reasons why Pradeep's poll possibly went wrong was he didn't account for that surge in the woman voter, more than 10% extra in the last phase. Now, that's something which is...
No, not just surge in favor of one party.
That's right.
11% benefit to Nitish over the RJD
That's
in the
right.
last
So
phase.
that makes, I think, polling difficult, particularly in a state like Tamil Nadu, where, as I said, you have these two major fronts who compete with each other. So I think Tamil Nadu will be fascinating. But to answer, Rahul, the reason why Bengal is so important is because, the BJP is doing perhaps what has not happened in Indian politics in decades. A party with 0 seats in 2011 is 10 years later aspiring for power. I mean, that kind of dramatic shift has really taken place in Indian politics, and this could be the last.
They did it in Tripura.
But small state, Bengal at the end of the day, the red fortress, the BJP has always seen it as one of its
You know why
states.
Amit Shah hopes to do it next?
Yes.
He said Kerala, after we win Bengal, he's confident that he's winning, will be our last ideological fight.
That's an interesting point because I think the BJP has a role to play in this Kerala election as a spoiler. The more percentage BJP gets, the more difficult for the Congress-UDF alliance. And maybe Sachinanand Murthy, who's joining us, can tell us that. Sachin, do you agree with that? That traditionally we've seen Kerala, UDF versus LDF. The BJP last time got about 14.9% of the vote, just one seat. But in this battle between the two fronts, one of which will win, is the BJP going to play the role of a spoiler there? How do you read the tea leaves in Kerala? Because most pollsters within Kerala, I'm told, are giving the left the edge this time, which could break 40 years of anti-incumbency.
Radip, the BJP is very confident that it will do very well in terms of votes in Kerala, and even if per chance it can convert the increase in voting into seats, say 4-5 seats, there could be a hung assembly. That is the kind of confidence some leaders of the BJP have in Kerala.
Right.
But otherwise, as you said, left began as a front runner. Pinarayi Vijayan, the chief minister, who had absolute control over his party. But as the election week after week, the schedule advanced, then there were some hiccups, and also the UDF got its act together, especially in central Kerala.
Right.
And then they had this campaign by Priyanka and Rahul, which was quite effective. But more than that, Shashi Tharoor himself did 65. It's the first time there's a new campaigner on the Congress beat in the last 10, 15 years or so. So there's a lot of energy which came into the Congress camp. So that's why it's still a very close election, but very open election.
The one point I want to build on is the role that women are playing. Because I have the results of the India Today Access My India exit poll. We, of course, can't tell you anything about it so far because the Election Commission wants us to wait till 7 p.m. And as good law-abiding citizens, that's exactly what we'll do. But what comes out very stark is the role, Manisha Priyam, that women voters are playing across the country in election after election in determining who wins. Because unlike earlier, where the general perception was it's the male folk of the house who determined where everybody else, young and old, and the women went out and voted, now women are taking their own independent choices, and very frequently that is impacting the final election outcome.
So women voters coming out in large numbers have very been important in the Tamil Nadu political scenario, and that's been there for long. So what can be seen as a direct correlation between women coming out in large numbers for elections is the fact that since the time the state governments, even to the northern parts of the Vindhya, have started offering development options, developmental freebies, women have relied on who they want to choose as the leader who can give them the benefits of development. And you can see that beginning from Madhya Pradesh, you can now see even in West Bengal and Nitish Kumar, lot of cash transfer programs, direct incentive programs. These are modeled on Latin American social protection programs where women are directly targeted. The Ladli Lakshmi, the Kanya Shri, the Cha Sundari in West Bengal. These are all programs that are directly targeted at women. In Bihar, I could hear some discussions. The Panchayat elections had reservations for women. So women are coming into their own, and in a sense, they are breaking the barriers of caste to be able to come out and vote.
I want to give you a sneak peek of what to expect. Look out when we start putting out the data for the gap between how women have voted and how men have voted. In some cases, it's upwards of double digits. Now, that is very significant. Pradeep, why is that happening?
I'm telling you.
Because ordinarily, if you look at, say, urban, rural, or age, or occupation, there is a 2 or 3 point gap between the trend, between one category and another. Here, 10-15% difference between how the men are voting and the women are voting.
I'll tell you what is happening actually, and it started with J. Jayalalitha only. As Manisha ji mentioned, you know, it's a matter of financial independence for women. That is when they become a decision maker, even when it comes to electing a government leader. I'll tell you, right from sari to bindi to pressure cooker to refrigerator to television set, this is started by J. Jayalalitha, and it was quite evident that women then and even now is voting in bulk in favor of Jayalalitha, and last assembly election was the classic example of that when she repeated the government which had never happened
but
historically.
But it's not just in Tamil Nadu.
No,
it's happening in state after state.
In fact, there was a time when we went to do reporting, we would usually be surrounded by all the male folk in the center of the village. Now you have to go away from them and meet the women. That's where you get a sense of which way the wind is blowing. Beneficiary politics. These benefits that have been given. Mr. Modi has been clever. Indira Awas Yojana, many of the houses are in the name of the woman. They're not given in the name of the male member. Many of Mamata Banerjee's schemes like Kanya Shri, Rupa Shri, directed towards women. Leader after leader in the last decade has realized that there is a woman vote bank out there, and that can make a difference in a tight election in particular. So I think, and it's only going to grow, Rahul, because I think politicians are clever.
And I'll tell you what had happened actually on the ground is that earlier, because of this direct money transfer, which Modi ji brought in actual practicality, though it was thought by earlier UPA government, but in practically it is done by them. And what had happened on the ground is, even in Manrega, though women used to go for the work, but actually money used to go to the men because cash usko dete the हाथ में. But अभी
जनधन योजना में आ जाता है.
जनधन योजना से अकाउंट ओपन हुआ और अकाउंट ओपन होने से डायरेक्ट कैश जा रहा है. दैट इज वेयर आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट द फाइनेंशियल इंडिपेंडेंस. जैसे ही आपको फाइनेंशियल इंडिपेंडेंस मिलती है, पहले बोलते थे देश जो है वो पुरुष प्रधान देश है, उसमें भी जो है साउथ थोड़ा सा अलग था बिकॉज एजुकेशन लेवल इन साउथ वाज फार बेटर देन रेस्ट ऑफ द कंट्री एज फार एज द वुमेन.
I just want to make one point, that when you look at the results, look at how women voters are deciding who wins. Because if you break this across categories, the gap between the two parties or the difference in the trend line is very marginal. Typically across age, across demography, the voting pattern is the same. Men and women are voting differently in this election, not just in one state, but across. And look out for that as we start putting that data out.